Hello, everyone, and welcome to PAEA's August WebinART, an anti-racist art room. Tonight, we will hear from Lynette Brown, PAEA's Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Chair, as we explore common biases, the structure of racism, allyship, our journey, and ongoing work towards becoming anti-racist art educators. Registered participants will receive a Google Form link via email after the event to fill out for their 1 hour of Act 48 credit. This webinar will be recorded and available at a later date on the PAEA website. Before we begin the webinar, we are asking participants to mute their microphones and keep their video off during the presentation. Those controls are located in the bottom left corner of the controls bar. We are also asking everyone to sign in on the chat roll. Please use the same name in which you registered for this event. The chat roll can be found along the bottom in the controls bar as well. Signing in will ensure that you receive the Act 48 link. You may also use the chat roll for questions. There will be a Q&A period after the presentation. Let's get this webinar rolling. Lynette, take it away.
Great, thank you. I'm going to really start with sharing my screen right away. So let's get that part out of the way. One moment.
Until then, only that person and the doctor knows what is in here.
You're worried about your mom cracking and spilling the beans.
Just trying to go back.
Yep, you're fine.
I'm fine. Awesome. Okay, let's see if I can just move this guy out of my way. Here we go. So how is that? Is that good?
Yep, you can move it into ready for present mode then.
Oh, great. All right, well, I'm going to start now. Good evening. And in the spirit of our learning space that we have here, I would like to begin tonight by sharing my own personal learning journey and state that I come here to share in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, on the land of the Lenape people and give honor some of the first people who have been discriminated against. So I would like to share with that. You may have noticed also that there's some subtitles in the center added to this presentation. And it's really an attempt to be inclusive and to expand our thinking and to embrace the concept of social justice. And along this work of being anti-racist, you will often hear people talking about abolitionist teaching or decolonizing the curriculum. So when we kind of frame our perspective for tonight, these are some other concepts and words that I think is important to also add and lend to our space. There we go. Okay. So just remember the whole purpose of this. I'm sorry. Let's remember that the sole purpose of tonight isn't for me to sort of enlighten others, because if the goal of that was tonight, it would really be a privilege serving or an attempt of what we would call white supremacy behavior. And that's not really what tonight is about. It's really about taking that journey, all of us, to become much more anti-racist along the pathway.
Non-racist.
Yeah. So, and continue with that, I just started with a little sign here. This is a sign that hangs outside my classroom and inside my classroom too. And it's sort of just a reminder for everyone that enters, as well as myself, that everyone is welcome, all colors, all ages, all sex, all beliefs, all people, everyone. This is a safe environment. This is an environment where we will grow and learn, as well as make mistakes, and that's all part of the journey. So really, to be quite honest, we are really actively, as we go along our personal journey or our professional journey in life, of working to be confronting racism, and we're on either side of it. Either we're working towards it, or we're kind of supporting it by choosing to ignore it, so to speak, or just to let things be. And also, this is a photograph right here that you see. This is from an artist. So it was an art exhibit, and the exhibit was "What Does Racism Look Like?" And this, I believe, he is the photographer, one of the photographers for the Washington Post. And you'll see some of this work. And throughout the presentation, you'll see work of different artists creating and sharing their voice and lending their voice in a lot of ways to making statements about racism or anti-racist work, as well as promoting, well, I'm going to say counter canon artists that we don't really see of the mainstream. And it's an attempt to, which we also can do in our classroom, to normalize work that is always kind of considered outside or other work, or work by other artists. So this quote right here by Esner was really a great quote. And I know I've been guilty of it. A lot of us at times, we tend to like certain types of work or periods in art of the past, and we kind of become too fixated on that. And something we need to do in regard to our journey is to really get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I believe this is a really great visual to just show the pathway, a journey to become an anti-racist. And I will elaborate on that a little bit more as we get into this presentation, is to really expand, to open our circle, our comfort zone, so to speak, and to move out. And this is a great diagram of different examples and things that happen to one as they're moving along their journey of becoming anti-racist, and they're moving from fear to learning to growth. And sometimes we kind of go back and forth where we're in the learning zone and we kind of go back to the fear zone, because this work is heavy work, it's substantial work, and it's quite challenging work, but it's also rewarding as well. So for this journey, it's important to examine privilege and positionality, and to really do some deep dives of critical reflection as well. And there are a lot of inventories and things. I believe Yale has one. There's also one by Peggy McIntosh. There's just a lot of them. I believe that there's even one that Zaretta Hammond has in her book, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. So there are a lot of resources out there to aid you along on your journey to work towards being anti-racist and practice, and by first taking that first step of reflecting critically. So I also would like to share, I think that being anti-racist is a lifelong lifelong skill that we all work towards, and it's really our responsibility to identify culture, your competencies in regard to that as a teacher, and who you are as a teacher on that journey. Where are you located? This year with, I guess I would say, all the things that have happened with COVID-19 and all of the brutal attacks and racist actions and injustice that we've seen against people of color that has happened, has really, I think, just ignited or allowed, we were so galvanized by it that people can't really look away any longer. And I think it was almost like a perfect storm for growth or change in regards to everything happening and coming to this point. I think that is a really critical point in education and art education in America and in race relations as well. And there are some questions here just for us to think about, and taking that stance of reacting to what has happened in our country during this time. And this stance, I guess we could say, as a result of feeling this dissonance and this reaction to what was happening, I think it was really a need for people to want to change, and that we were kind of forced to take action or to increase the action. So I think this is just a great time for our network, for education as a whole, and for everyone to reach out and support one another and to do a lot of critical thinking. So as we move along with that, these are just some great questions to consider throughout the presentation, and we can kind of go back to it. We can elaborate on it at the end with the question and the discussion part of it. So just think about, as art educators, being these gatekeepers in the classroom, and think about how we police the classroom and the institutional art education in our daily practice. As educators, sometimes we're really, that classroom management is a big piece and we're proud of it. But where do we kind of cross the line sometimes with that? And then also when we think about our students who may be Black, Indigenous, or people of color, how are we helping to allow them to see themselves in our practice, in our education, and their identity as artists? So these are all different things to just kind of think about as we move on. This is there's a typo in her name, Dr. Jonia Cuff. This is really a quote from her, and it was one that was really, I thought, striking for me. It is the responsibility of educators to listen and to respond to groups who have been oppressed. And once again, this is another work by a different artist, Storm, that in the time of shelter, and his response to racism. So I thought it was just a great quote and something for us to think we do have this responsibility. So often students come to school and they don't feel they can be their true authentic self because there are so many rules and so many things and cultures that are different, or they may feel that they've been silenced in regard to who they are in their culture because they have to kind of assimilate to the expectations of school. So that quote, this is one that really, I think, just kind of keeps me going and allows me to really think about that. It's my responsibility to respond and to constantly shape my teaching practice to include everyone, especially groups who have been oppressed. So for the next couple of minutes, we're going to watch a few minutes, a little more than that, some videos. And I'm going to ask you to consider these quotes in regard to the videos, the first two, and then there'll be something different for the third one. So this is Audre Lorde. We have all been programmed to respond to human differences between us with fear and loathing, and to handle that difference in one of three ways: ignore it, or if that's not possible, copy it if we think it's dominant, or destroy it if we think it is subordinate. But we have no patterns for relating across our human differences as equals. And then we have Dr. Ibram Kendi. Racist ideas have defined our society since its beginning, and it can feel so natural and obvious as to be banal, but anti-racist ideas remain difficult to comprehend, in part because they go against the flow of the country. So these are two quotes, and I'm going to show you two videos, and I would just like for you to consider the quotes.
Who said that?
The lady at the store.
That is not a compliment.
Listen, it's an ugly, nasty word, and you are going to hear it. Nothing I can do about that. But you are not going to let that word hurt you. You hear me?
There are some people who think you don't deserve the same privileges just because of what you look like. It's not fair. It's not.
Remember, you can do anything they can. The difference is you gotta work twice as hard and be twice as smart. Come straight home after practice. You got your ID? All right. Guess I stopped it.
How's your review?
We're good.
You good?
Yeah,
You see?
we're good.
Okay.
Good.
Now, when you get pulled over,
I'm a good driver. Okay.
baby,
Don't worry.
this is not about you getting a ticket. This is about you not coming home.
I'm gonna be okay. Right? Okay.
It's not fair. But you keep showing up.
You are not pretty for a black girl. You are beautiful, period. Okay? Don't ever forget that.
So now I'm just going to show the next one. I'm not going to really, I wanted to jump in, but I don't. I just want to show these and for you guys to think about it.
Now to a restaurant confrontation caught on camera. A black mother and her 9-year-old son denied entry. The mother, Marcia Grant, recorded the incident and says a dress code was enforced only because of their race. ABC's TJ Holmes has a story.
You telling me we cannot eat here?
Two young boys in the same restaurant, dressed pretty much the same, but one of them was denied service, told he was violating the restaurant dress code. Which one?
I don't want you to sympathize with me. I just want you to tell me why it's different for my son.
This incident captured on video when Marcia Grant and her 9-year-old son Dallas went into the Ouzo Bay restaurant in Baltimore.
That white kid out there can't eat here with his tennis shoes on and his athletic shirt.
We allow tennis shoes, but not athletic shorts and t-shirts.
Grant repeatedly asks for an explanation.
The little white kid that just sat out there had on athletic tennis shoes and an athletic shirt.
I understand that you're upset. If there's
No, it's not that I'm upset. Why does he get to wear athletic wear and my son can't?
I would love for you to be able to come back. Do you live close enough for your son to change?
The Atlas Restaurant Group, owners of the restaurant, has now issued an apology and says 2 managers of the restaurant are no longer with the company. In a statement saying, "We are sickened by this incident and we sincerely apologize to Marcia Grant, her son, and everyone impacted by this painful incident," adding that dress codes are in no way meant to be discriminatory and that they've since done away with dress codes for kids 12 and under. This is the latest caught on camera incident that gives a glimpse of how routine daily experiences can be anything but for Black Americans.
Please take your phone off.
Please don't come closer.
Bird watching in Central Park.
I'm being threatened by a man in the Ramble. Please send the cops immediately.
Or working out in your own building's gym.
This guy came accusing us we can't be here.
I'm calling 911 now.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of stop there. You can feel free to, if you want to, I want to give opportunity, if you want to respond or react to what you're seeing, since this is not the discussion portion, please feel free to type, I guess, in the chat your response to some of the videos we just watched, because I'm quite sure by seeing that you're going to feel compelled to respond, and I want this to be organic, so that for you to have the opportunity to respond. So when we think about that and the trauma as educators, you know, we cannot say we're trauma informed if we are staying quiet in regard to conditions and things like that. And just to know that racism and being a victim of it causes trauma. And our students come to school with that trauma. So sometimes there's some of those invisible things we talk about. We don't know when our children come from different homes, and students that we educate what they're going through, and a lot of times we don't. But there is a trauma that's really not always spoken about, and it's the trauma from racism that some students and people of color experience. You cannot, you know, go through things like that and not experience some sort of trauma. So I thought this was just a great quote right here to share. And now I'm going to show you one more video. And also in the chat box, you can type your reactions or responses to this. As you watch this video, consider the possible outcomes from this video. What could have happened? What could have come from the look, so to speak? And also to think about, what role does this have in today's climate with microaggressions and racial biases, prejudice, and things like that. So let's take a look at this video and consider the look. So that was, you know, a video right there, and that whole thing of the look in teaching. And I know as an educator, and a lot of educators will proudly say, oh, I can give a look without saying a word. In my classroom, management skills are just superb. My students know when to stop and things. So, you know, the look. And another colleague was really great. She mentioned and talked and spoke about maybe the look that she's given students, or sometimes when she gives that look, is it a look saying you're accepted or you're welcome here? So there are just a lot of biases and things that come into play with when we interact and react. And I think those videos illustrate a lot of that racism and bias. And I guess we could just all consider in this journey how these behaviors relate to our practice when we're thinking, you know, deeply in regard to this. And this is just a great visual. It is credited right down below from the National Equity Project.org. And it really shows how a lot of times biases lead to the practices and policies in schools and in other institutions. And as a result of those practices, that outcomes can be not equitable. And it creates racial disparity. So when we think about a lot of times when we stereotype or we have certain attitudes, and these attitudes that we're not really being aware of to a certain level, it creates that implicit bias. And it kind of adds to creating an environment that's racist. Now, I had started putting little arrows on this diagram here, and I'm quite sure most of us may have seen this diagram before, and of basic behaviors that are really white supremacist behaviors, horrible ones, KKK, racial slurs, jokes, lynching, and things like that. But then those covert ones, the ones that seem to be a little bit more socially acceptable. And I just started saying, well, which of these behaviors that are socially acceptable, let's just do a little test and see what happens in the classroom. And I just stopped because after a while, the arrows were just really becoming, to me, that's really aggressive. And things such as colorblindness, and I will define that a little bit more too with students in the classroom. That bootstrap theory, oh, if they just work hard, they'll become successful. Cultural appropriation, which we see happens all the time, especially in art education. Considering AAVE, uneducated, which is the African American Vernacular English, not understanding that there's a really complex system to that. Treating children of color as adults, thinking they're much older, and we could go on and on. There's some arrows there, but just looking at this, there's so many more that I didn't pull out arrows to that we can think about, that we see, we witness, or consciously or unconsciously participate in education. So that's an example right there to share. And here's another example of the Washington Post photographer, his work, very striking, I would say. So I threw out a lot of words, said a lot of things, a lot of them because a lot of you may already be familiar, but I'm just going to kind of go over. There's 3 types of racism shown on this chart here. There's a 4th one that I will talk a little bit more about, but we have structural racism, which is really those systems that are featured in public or big policies and practices, and seem to be cultural, seem to be norms, but really create a disparity. Then we have the institutional ones. Those policies are within and of course institutions like in schools, which will put certain groups at advantage and certain groups at a disadvantage. And then we have the individual ones and biases and things that come out in interactions. So here's a definition, and I'm just going to talk about the examples of structural racism. And it's really about that normalizing that happens and making it legitimate. So examples of education may be like tracking students or standardized testing, assessment and testing. Redlining is a big one. These are examples of structural racism. And school funding, which some people, tend to be on the end where they get very little. So there's some examples there. Then there's the institutional racism, such as students of color being punished at a higher rate than their white counterparts. And some of the definitions I'm going to use today, I did give credit to Keith Lawrence and the Aspen Institute on community change and applied research at Berkeley. So for race and public policy. So that's where some of these definitions are coming from for these words or terms. And then there's that individual racism or internalized racism, which are those private manifestations of racism that reside inside of the individual. They may come out. They may be expressed or come out as privilege and different beliefs about that one group have the dominant group over another group. And the fourth one that was not shared on that little color chart or spin chart was internalized racism. And that part here, I want to be clear that it's when I'm going to say that it becomes weaponized, where you have people of color who kind of take that poison of racism that seeps into their own psyche and their beliefs. And they will believe certain racist things about their own people, their own culture, about their own selves. So that's another one as well. And here, once again, there's some photographs of different examples of things in history where racism was like captured, so to speak. And the lower left one here is a photograph by Gordon Parks, where they did a study and a test and with young children of color, seeing what they preferred. And you have that example preferring the white doll as opposed to the black. So here it is at the very, formative young years, we see how pervasive and that whole internalized racism starts. So I have three terms here, and we hear a lot of, about these terms, but we want to first start off and say that whole, the term non-racist is really not a term. It was a term that was created as a self-defense mechanism, not to address the issue. But what's so detrimental about it is that it's basically blaming the victim when, or people, I'm non-racist, it doesn't happen, and it's very hurtful. And then we have anti-racist, which is a person who makes a conscious choice to act or to challenge some aspect of the white supremacist system that we all live in here in the United States. It may be using their privilege, asserting their privilege, weaponizing it in such a way, like an example with the woman and the gentleman in New York and Central Park. And it's just a form of oppression too. It's used as that. So, and then we have, I'm sorry, I really went around that way. I'm sorry, anti-racist is the conscious choice for that, where you're challenging that. And so I apologize, I have to kind of backtrack. Anti-racist is when you're consciously being aware of it and you are really working to take that critical look and look at privilege and try to make a change in regard to that form of oppression. Then race, but being racist or racism. Racism is that, is that privilege that happens here, and using that white supremacist system to afford to give advantages to people who are white, and to basically put people of color at a disadvantage. So I'm sorry, I had to correct that. So moving forward, what we're going to do now is really, I guess, let's take a look at privilege and power in art education. And to really be honest, I think it's really important to really think about it and address how there is this privilege and power and in art education. And we can look at it in so many ways. We think about the arts being so expressive and given freedom, but to be quite honest, that freedom isn't always for everyone. We may see it from that point of view and perspective, but sometimes, a lot of times, our students may not. So as we move forward in the presentation today, this is going to be a perfect time to look at the arts not being without power. And I always would tell my students, oh, the arts are powerful. You can get people to think a certain way. And we talked about propaganda and things like that in teaching art. Well, art is powerful also because there's a silent nature of whiteness in art that is embedded in the way it's been addressed historically in the United States. And as a result, some people feel disenfranchised. And if we think about the language such as master, the masters in art, the masters were really the older white men, the European men. When we think about language in art education with craft, when we look at pieces that are craft is really a distinction from fine art. Craft is usually things that are a little more tribal or created or, a little more different out of the mainstream. And then when we consider our very own selves, even though sometimes as art educators, or we're considered specialists, we may not always feel special in our building if we're the only one. But however, when we think about that concept, we're specialists, it's rather elitist in a way. And it tends to make some people feel that art or that pathway or avenue is kind of out of reach. So it just, you know, something for us to think about our language in the art classroom and when we use them and what we're showing. And along with that, let's think about or imagine the perfect or the ideal art student. And think about that student that you may dread seeing that's taking art too. And when we think about that ideal or perfect student, let's think about that student culturally. Let's think about their behavior, the ideal student. Let's think of, you know, that student a lot of times fits a certain type. It's a certain type, the ideal or perfect art student. So when we kind of think critically about that, we can kind of like make some conscious changes, I think, and trying to make the art classroom a little more inclusive. And by doing that, we can shift and maybe get more students to appreciate and love art too, as a way not to feel as if something other or something that they can't do. So as we move forward, we're also going to examine the power and privilege and subject and mediums and other things in art in our next couple of slides here. For example, Crayola crayons, the colors. And the 1940s, late 40s, you know, you would pick up a crayon and you would see that Indian red as a color, or we would see flesh as the color peach. And it became something that a lot of people thought that, you know, it was such a deep tradition of this perception that it basically belonged in schools. It came from schools and education itself. So it's really interesting, and that historically, when you think about, you know, not so long ago, we crayon boxes, you're pulling out colors, children were, and they were, red was Indian red, flesh was peach, flesh was not my skin color or so many other people's color. So it wasn't until later that they changed in the 60s, and they changed a lot of the colors to where flesh was a little different. And now we have the multicolor boxes of crayons and things like that, which shows a little more diversity and inclusion. Another area, anatomy. A lot of times when you're working and studying anatomy and you look at some of the examples, you always saw these white classical figures. So if we think about that and we compare that to the early process, the photographic process of daguerreotype, and when you see people of color in these situations, they were seen, and there's a group here, this was from a study where you had the researcher who was classifying people of color to prove that they were inferior. So when you saw these people in these early photographs in this early time, they were more or less put there to show being inferior. So we have these historical early pictures of people of color, and it's highlighting the quote unquote inferiority of them. And then you have these classical figures, which are the perfect example. So there's some other, this is another place where you get these messages of the power or the disenfranchisement of certain people in art. And then when we look at colonial portrait paintings, and you have two works of art or pieces here. And if you notice the young woman known as Creole in the red turban, she's posed there, and both ladies have their heads covered. So you look at their pose, you look at their head coverings, you look at their clothing, but there's a different message. The one girl there that's young, and there's this sensual look in regard to her. Her blouse is off her shoulder, and she has this look there. And if you know the history of those, the coverings, the TNOG laws that happened in the early United States, they were the laws where it was to basically to kind of like keep people or women of color of African descent in their place. They had to cover their hair, because at that time, a lot of them in Louisiana and places like that, they were able to gain a certain level of, some of them were free, and things were in that area, some of it was changing. And a lot of the women of African descent was being, capturing the eye of the men, the Spanish men, the European men, and it became an issue. And the way to curb that or to stop that was that they had to cover their hair because the women were being expressing their culture, and they were adding things to their hair, beads and things. And it was felt that in order to show who they were to keep that difference, they could not any longer show their hair. So it was a law to keep that excessive attention to their dress, because a lot of white women during that time felt that they were losing their husbands or their men because the men were keeping these women as mistress. So it was a way to control women. And if you look at these paintings, this just shows the history of that in art. Perspective. A lot of times when we think about perspective, we see perspective, the School of Athens and things like that. And when we teach perspective, linear perspective and things like that, we're teaching it from that whole school of thought. We don't think about perspective from the Eastern way or other groups. So here's another example where in the art classroom, we can become a little more inclusive and show that counter canon of work by introducing more work in our environment for our students. So I just showed you a few of them right there. And we can just think about this and how it adds up. So when you think about anti-racism, it is social justice. When you think about anti-racism, it is not just diversity, because diversity really is variety. It's not just equality, because that means the same. And we already know the same doesn't always work. So when we really think about it, we're really trying to think about fairness and justice and promoting equity. And this is just another way to promote this equity is by including other works of art that's considered now non-mainstream in the classroom. But also when we move ahead and we do things like that, we really need to really research and work on the true meaning and not replicating, which sometimes can be a little confusing or a little challenging for some. So it's really about shifting like the tide or changing in a way, and understanding that showing, and we're going to show art that's not so much Eurocentric, but also the importance of that counter canon by doing certain things. Remembering that we're going to look to cultural experts when we introduce this. Is really about a exchange. We're not just taking something to benefit ourselves, but it's really about learning, and there's a mutual respect. And it's not tokenism where you take one thing. So if you think about this concept or the word air, I think it's a great way to kind of help you along the journey when you're working in your classroom. How do I go about this? How am I being equitable with this? And you want to ask the elders or ask experts or people, cultural experts and people. So that's the A. I, invite. You want to invite artists and guests and other people in the community. Another way, and then the R is to reflect. You want to reflect with intent and purpose, but also you want to respect. So we could even throw another R in there. So when you move along those lines and work, along that way, it's a way to kind of stay true to what your goal is as you move along. And I just have some examples of work where sometimes artists, some of the European artists would look at pieces and take it for their own gain, or to kind of like mystify or to kind of fetish other cultures. So, this work is heavy work. You have to provide yourself with grace when you do this work, and acknowledge and learn and change and action, and understand that won't be perfect. There will be mistakes along the journey. We all make mistakes. I make mistakes in regard to this journey as well when I'm working and teaching with other groups and other cultures. So it's really important to give yourself grace. Some more definitions, because I didn't want to really just throw out a lot of words in the beginning, but something I think is really important to address, especially as a Black woman, is colorism. And that's that privilege or favorable treatment that's given based on skin color. You see it in the classroom. Sometimes you'll see it where, and even within communities, where lighter people seem to get afforded certain privileges or opportunities as opposed to others. They'll say, oh, well, I'm being very sensitive to other people and other needs, but does that person fit a certain look or type, or your idea of the way a person of color should look or behave? So it's something to really think about. Another one, microaggressions, those subtle or indirect instances of racism. for example, saying, oh, colorblind, I'm colorblind, I don't see color. That's a problem as well. People want you to see them, to be recognized, their history and who they are. So that's one. And then I mentioned decolonize or decolonizing is about rethinking and reframing. And there will be a lot of, there's already a lot of work. It's been a lot of work in universities for a few years as well in regard to reconstructing curriculums to make it much better and more inclusive. And in regard to that too, I always say, whether you're teaching in an environment where your student population is diverse or it's not diverse, you're teaching a group of students and everyone's white, let's say, for example, all the students, there's still a responsibility as an educator to inform your students and to educate your students and expose them and give them the best quality education. So anti-racist education is for everyone. It's not just for whatever environment you're in, but it's really for everyone. Another concept, abolitionist teaching, which you will hear, where it's abolishing and fighting for a system where students are not just surviving, they're there, but they're thriving. Everyone can be successful. And there's a lot of extra research and books out there about that, where there's actually changes in the brain when students are taught from an anti-racist or abolitionist approach, and with learning and neuroplasty. And then once again, you have BIPOC, which is the Black, Indigenous, people of color. And that distinction really talks about uniting people in liberation, people of color, for freedom and for equality. However, it's also acknowledging that and understanding that not all people of color face the same challenges or injustice. And I think there was even some research that came out from, correct me if I'm wrong, Harvard or Yale, in regard to the number of students that were getting in that were white or Asian as opposed to other ones. So even when people are of color, there's still differences. Then I just have example right here of the casta paintings from Mexico, or what was called New Spain, which was done, it's really a system of hierarchy, and it was a way of racially classifying people in present day Mexico, whereas people who came over from Spain were at the highest, and then it would go down based on whether you were born here as a person from Spain, or if you had, if you were mixed. And if you look at the chart, it shows here, and you can also notice, and if you did a study in these paintings, right, where not only does the clothing, but also their stature and role changes from the beginning to the end. So here's another example of where we see this racism in art and history. So I kind of discussed those terms and provided you with a lot so far in regard to our evening. But now we're going to move on to really talking about roles and our roles. There's different roles, and I think this is a great chart. It shows just a reminder, because I always say students are so smart, they're so perceptive, and they see faith. Children, students, young people are, they see faith. They know what you value and what you don't value by what you do or what you don't do, or what's present in the classroom and what's not present, or what you mention and what you don't mention. So this chart here is really great because it talks about the types of allyship, whether it's authentic or performative. And I know we all saw back in, I guess, July or June, the plastering all over social media and with businesses and companies, everyone coming out, I support Black Lives Matter, and statements like that and all. And some of it was bandwagoning because it's a business. They want to, increase their profit and things like that. You saw videos and things like that. And I even showed some videos today. Whether it's performative or authentic, time will tell with a lot of these institutions, but there is a difference. So when it's authentic, there's empathy, there's grief, there's outrage. You're going to educate yourself. You're going to examine your own privilege, do those deep dives, and you're going to be committed to anti-racist work. When it's performative, you're going to kind of do it for optics and benefiting. And then the below chart deals with when you're examining things like that, it doesn't feel good. And there's the fragility you have to address. And, it's normal to have these feelings of a little defensiveness or discomfort or fear. But how you work and move ahead with that, or rationalize it, or use it is really important. And then there's the other aspect of it also, where there's this, where you weaponize it, you use it for your own gain, and things like that. So this is just a really good chart to look at, and as a reminder as you move forward, like your position, because it's always great for all of us to always examine our position in regard to privilege and things. So once again, it can feel daunting, but this quote by James Baldwin, I think, is just a great one, that, you can't change anything until you face it. So when that happens, and when you start thinking and addressing these things and taking this action, you're going to have this shift in the classroom. You're going to shift from being an inclusive teacher to an anti-racist teacher, one who is consciously working, and I just want to reiterate that again, to make sure that there's this equity, and there are a lot of ways to do it. And here's just a few ways to do it, where you're going to take advantage of opportunities as entry points in the classroom, in education. You're going to be more honest. You're going to have those courageous conversations, so to speak. You're not only going to just have works of art in the classroom that show other groups of people or focus lessons around that, but you're really going to also point out the power or examples of racism and stereotypes that we may see in media, or when there's ways, and you will work to teach authentically instead of promoting false narratives. You can give examples when privilege arises in the classroom and other places. So there's really a shift. It's more than just having those books available. So what does an anti-racist classroom look like? Well, the environment. The environment is going to be extensive work or collection of artists displayed from non-mainstream works or cultures known as the counter canon. We're going to have, it's going to be really visible. And it's not visible so much to compare, because you're not comparing, because they're different perspective, different lenses, but to notice, to observe. It will be available in your environment. Your environment will be rich in that way. You'll use various art mediums and materials, traditional, non-traditional, technology, which has been a great resource for keeping us all connected, and for this ever-expanding knowledge and base that we're learning. And you'll address visual stereotypes and things like that. That's the environment. The teacher, as the educator, your role will shift. You're not always going to be the expert. We're not always the expert. You're not always going to be the leader, but you will be a facilitator and a lifelong learner and a collaborator. And you will acknowledge your position of privilege too. And students in that environment, they're going to use their own cultural capital. It's their knowledge base, their wealth that they come to the classroom with to inform and to teach, because it's very much a community environment. And the roles for the students will sometimes, they will shift and move into the learner or the leader or the expert or the collaborator or facilitator. So that's really what we see in those environments. Now, when we think about what it sounds like, since we're talking about inquiry, taking the stance of questioning and using it. So when we talk about the sound, it's going to sound like in that environment, open-ended questioning, engaging conversations and discussions that are rich. Sometimes they may be challenging conversations, presentations. There will be honest answers from the teacher. I'm not sure, I don't know. Well, that's really different. I don't really know about that. Can you tell me more? It'll be truth-telling. You'll be interrogating these false narratives. This doesn't really look right or sit right, or how do you feel? There'll be a lot of that, but there will be listening and learning. A lot of listening and learning from the teacher is going to sound like, as well as from the students. They will feel a little more comfortable that they don't have to be fake, or they can be authentic in this environment. And there'll be reflective conversations all around. And you will hear student voice take more of a stage, grow larger in that space, because the voice is already there, but it's really about listening and allowing that space for student voice. What does an anti-racist class feel like? And that's also, I think, important to know. That environment where certain work or other work will not be, art won't be such a mystery to some people. There'll be this exploration, and you'll gain understanding. It'll be much more of a feel of a global or environment. And it's going to feel like, for you as the educator, challenging, let's see, because it'll be inspiring as well, but it's also going to probably be somewhat exhausting at times, and moments of uncertainty. That's going to happen as well. And then for students, once again, they're going to feel a little more comfortable, hopefully, in this environment where but then there's going to be, to be quite honest, at times they may not feel so comfortable, some students. So that's something we have to look at in this environment when you have an environment in a class that's anti-racist. It's going to be real, I will say that. And what actions does an anti-racist class include? Actions would be the environment, it'll be shared space, a deep dive into learning through exploration for everyone, flexibility on our parts, a lot of reflective practice and research, a lot of research and reading and training, and also focused thinking and studio assignments and studio habits are a great thing to have as action in an environment like that too, where you're engaging, you're persisting, you're not stopping. There's a lot of observation and reflection. Students will be risk takers. You're going to be a risk taker also as an educator. And there'll be that focused thinking. Students will be agents of change. They're going to be the agents of change, and there will be a lot of mistakes. Lessons that can lend itself to an anti-racist classroom. Murals. We have murals all throughout the United States. And for those who are in this region or can get to this region, there's quite a lot in the Philadelphia area as well. Murals were such a teaching piece over the summer too. They've always been one, but that's a great way to go. Looking at popular artists, illustrators, children illustrators, and how they also have will change, and there's many sides to an artist. Students can use inquiry to examine the role, the effect, the message of their favorite artists, and the importance in regard to today, where you saw artists like Kadir Nelson on Rolling Stone, and you can compare works of artists to the past or observe. Using works of art to have those courageous conversations is a really great one. Describing works of art, what message do you feel the artist is conveying? What's missing? What would you do? Things of that nature, just really looking and opening up the possibilities with your students to have a discussion, a rich discussion with work. Here's another piece that's really interesting that you could use. There's so many works of art. This is one that I just know that I use during our time before the school year ended with my students, and we talked about work. And you're going to be a learner, because my students, I know for a fact, shared so many viewpoints and things that I didn't look or I didn't see or I didn't notice in the work. And another piece, and this is something that's really great for all ages, to really just create a kind of an open discussion and to kind of build up that climate or that environment. But also, I will have to also add along with that, I'd be remiss not to say that, is that when you engage in this type of work, you are dealing with sometimes trauma in some ways. So you do need to be prepared and to really go to experts for help for some of these things as well, because you don't know a lot of times in the classroom what things may be a trigger. So you have to also be honest in regard to that and be aware of that, but not back down from really doing this work. Photography, once again. Self-portraits. We do a lot of self-portraits in the classroom. Self-portraits are pretty big. So this is a great one. I always think about this Buford Delaney piece of James Baldwin, and that work that's at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, where you have this Black man, and he's painted with yellows and light blues and greens and colors like that. And this is always a great piece for my students in middle school to discuss when we talk about colors, or this color is in my skin color, when we deal with colorism and comments and statements like that. And, you know, it's always, for me as an educator, it's a great way to say, well, you know what? I don't think there's a company or Crayola that can reproduce the wonderful colors that we all have with our skin. And we don't always have to go that way. How do we know that this is James Baldwin, or this is, how do we know? How do we know it's a Black man? Do we know? What colors are used? So we talk a little bit more about that. So that's the opportunity with that work here. This piece here, when you're working with, really this here book by Sandra Cisneros, who also wrote The House on Mango Street, which is another great book. This can be used for elementary all the way up to adults. This is a great piece where, in that book, it's written in English, always also in Spanish, and you can talk about when you're working with portrait hair and texture and things of that nature. And she's saying within her house, her family, her mother, her father, everyone has a different texture of hair. Because that's always an issue and it's a fascinating thing. But also, once again, we have to also think about that and be respectful, because some people don't discuss hair, some groups and some culture. So it's just being aware of that. So that's another book and another avenue to have conversations and to use for study. And then when we talk about that, what about people who don't show their hair or their culture? And this is a photograph work by the artist too. Sharon Nashet, I'm probably mispronouncing that. I hope I'm saying it correctly. If not, I'm gonna make that my business also to learn, because I think it's important to be respectful and do that. But this is another work where this artist was really talking about or making a statement about herself and portraits and women, Muslim women and things of that nature. There's another piece, and I didn't show, that became controversial. The artist that created the Hope poster for Barack Obama, he did another piece that was commissioned, a series of American women, and we are Americans too, and it was a Muslim woman, and her hijab that she's wearing, her head covering, was the American flag. That, which was done out of respect, ended up becoming controversy. Some people were against it, some people were for it, some people felt that not all Muslim women, a lot of Muslim women have fought to not wear it. And to do that, we're not just one type of person or linear. So once again, it's really about education and learning. And of course, you're going to make mistakes and you learn from them. And this work is challenging. Other lessons that you can work on, and you could do sculpture. There's sculpture units, designing a monument, opportunity to talk about what was happening in events here. You can talk about the past, examining sculpture, about Black figures in sculpture, about when some work was restored. Some pieces that they thought were just all white weren't. You could talk about the role of monuments and taking them down, and which ones stay and who makes that decision, the ever-changing role in society and things. Once again, the whole debate over removing them or not removing them, there's a conversation right there. And then there's this piece here. This was an article where this woman was talking about monuments, this writer and artist and poet, and took it to another level where she talks about her body being a monument and the history of her skin color, colorism, and the lightness, and what happened to her. So if you want a monument of what happened in the South, look at these people of different shades and things like that. So there's a lot of conversations, some for mature groups and audiences, and things that we can do to address based on where you are in the journey, where you are with your students. There's so many resources, they just keep growing. Elementary level, about how kindness is not enough. We have to do more than just focus on kindness. And books, wonderful books that are available that you can use as your starting point for conversation and inclusiveness and equity. And once again, the websites, I remember when the anti-racist art teachers, I remember when it was just a post when it was starting, and then how there's so many resources and so many places to go for that, and links to it and things. What do anti-racist teachers do differently? A great article, and I think this is from the Atlantic. What's happening today with signs? The Smithsonian, the curators are collecting signs, and they're talking about art, the art of 2020, and stories and things like that. So, you know, when we get back to Eisner's statement about being fixated on the past, we really are at a point in our history as art educators and art education where things are just changing and moving at a really unbelievable pace. And there are more resources to help to get you started, such as We Are More Than Words, which is a resource that was compiled from a lot of people who kind of contribute. There'll be more forthcoming. This one's focusing on Black artists. There are more forthcoming with the support of all of you. There will be links where we can have that available. There's the anti-racist art teachers site. Etopia has one, creating the anti-racist classroom. And there's another one, Smart History may have some things that can kind of lend towards being helpful. This is a new one from Art Tour, which is in conjunction with the Brandywine Museum. And there's going to be a lot of upcoming webinars in regard to that. And if you're interested in this as well, if you just put your, I guess, your name and your email address in the chat, and we can get a hold of that, and it can be forwarded so you can be sent out a link for this. And this, what's really great about this here is a collection of diverse contemporary artists and art, but they're telling, it's their story. So it's not co-authored or rewritten, the history. It's really the story or the history of each artist, for the most part. It's from the artists. They're writing their bios. So to me, that's a unique feature right there. So final thoughts, really, scrutinize a lot, allow for occupying a space in your classroom with media and objects and work of arts, engage in that thoughtful dialogue, challenge the norms, normalize work that we don't always see, the counter canon, so to speak, because it's really desperately needed in our field. And also critically view work and things that are coming is a great way to transform the curriculum, because remember that the absence of this is not neutral. It's using privilege to send the wrong message. And we really just want to be, really go about this work to really be inclusive and do a lot of the things that we need to do. So let's just kind of like offer counter visuals and strategies and things of that nature. And I think even though it can be taxing and grueling at times, it's just as much rewarding doing this work. And I just look forward to working with everyone and seeing what's going to happen in the future, because I think we all are as art educators really rolling up our sleeves and already doing that work. So I'm going to stop now and I guess open up the opportunity for people to questions, discussions, and things of that nature.
Wow, that was great information. And as Lynette just said, we do have time for questions. So you may use the chat roll to type in any questions or comments that you have for Lynette. And you may certainly unmute yourself and ask your question live. It is your choice to leave your video off or turn it on at this time. We are leaving it up to you to decide on your level of privacy, as the recording will be housed on the PAEA website.
Great, so I see a few questions, I believe, and even from the beginning, I think there's one with, oh, did I lose it? They're moving. It was one about, tell me about the look. I'm trying to see if I can find it again. Oh, my students tell me about the look when they have experienced it around the city. Right, it is very much, I think when you have that unpleasant experience of a look, you know what it means. And to have it over and over again can be detrimental. So I agree, yes. I'm just trying to move quickly and move down some resources. Any other questions? Because I may have missed some, and I guess people can feel free to, I guess, like you said, ask questions.
And Lynette, I think we discussed this, and I can't remember what you had decided. Many people were asking about links to the resources or possibly your PowerPoint as a resource to go out later. I believe yes. You were willing to send that out.
Oh, very much so. Yes, yes. Okay. It's very much, a PowerPoint will be available. Yes.
Okay, so when we get that, when Lynette gets that to us, we will send that out to you. And because you registered for this webinar, we have your email addresses, so you do not need to send those. We can get in touch with you.
And I do see one question that's a great question. What happens when parents push back? You will get pushback, because a lot of times some students you find will really, some of their views are really parroted views, like a parrot, a bird from their parents and things of that nature. I can just think of a time where I had students creating self-portraits and they were around their identity and cultural symbols and things that were meaningful to them. And there was a student that wanted to keep putting a swastika in there. And some students were upset about it. And I explained, and I felt very comfortable and confident to explain to this parent that even though it was part of that student's heritage, that symbol has become a symbol of hate. I did go back historically and share that that symbol was used in other cultures before. You see the beginning of that symbol in the East, in India. You see it in Africa and some Adinkra symbols and things of that nature. So I have shared that that part, but we really had to go full circle with it. And I explained to the parent that things that cause hate and pain, I want everyone to be safe in my classroom and environment. There are things like that that we have to take a responsibility and a role to safeguard each and every student. So I really, so you will get pushback, but you have to come, I feel personally, coming from that place of, you have to understand there are consequences for things like that, symbols, and just to be aware of that and to share that it was not a place in my classroom to harm or to use hateful symbols. And parent didn't like it. However, it was, that's how we dealt with the pushback. So
any other questions for Lynette? I know she gave us so much information. It was a lot to process, and I think she answered most of our questions with all that great information.
Okay.
See, that means you did a good job.
I guess so. And once again, I am, we can send that out, and I'm available for any other questions or things along the way.
Okay, we will definitely make sure we get those resources out to you. So we really do hope that everyone enjoyed their time with us tonight, and please make sure you have signed in on the chat roll to verify your participation in tonight's WebinART. September's WebinART has been posted on the PAEA Facebook page, and I am now going to paste that registration link in the chat for you. So there is that, so feel free to copy that. Also, remember the registration links for all PAEA sponsored events are also available on the PAEA website calendar, the PAEA Facebook pages, and through email from me, PAEA's Director of Programming, or your division or region reps. So make sure you have signed in on the chat, and remember to check your email for the Act 48 link coming soon. And unless anybody else has any other questions, I just see lots of thank yous in there. Then I guess that's a wrap. Thank you, Lynette.
Thank you.
And good night, everyone.
Good night.